Welcome to the Leave Nothing on the Table podcast, home of exclusive conversations with founders, industry experts, investors, and so much more. I'm your host, Mac Lackey. Let's welcome today's guest and get started. All right, thank you so much for joining us. This is an expert session with ExitDNA. Today, I'm super excited that we have a true expert who also happens to be a business partner and a good friend of mine, Robert Taylor. Robert, as many of you within ExitDNA know, has been a frequent collaborator. He's part of our team. He's on a lot of our calls. But beyond being a gracious individual, lending his time and expertise to us, he is a licensed professional investment banker. So when it comes time to talk about creating a deal team, which is our conversation today, I think of Robert as one of the true experts in the industry. So Robert, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Of course. Appreciate it, Matt. Always happy to get back to this community. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Well, I want to jump right in. And so again, the subject today is really about creating the deal team. And this came specifically out of, and Robert, you know this as well, we had a trial of what we're calling the Exit Weekend about a month ago. And it was a great experience. And when we asked our participants for some feedback, one of our members who actually just sold her company specifically said she realized that the importance of creating a deal team and probably didn't realize the importance of building that deal team in advance so they could really advise her on her exit and some of the things that were likely to happen. So it really struck me as this is something that we need to talk about. So Robert, from your perspective, when someone says to you, they need to create a deal team, what does that mean to you and who is on a deal team from your perspective?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mac. And yeah, I mean, there was a lot of valuable input coming out of the Exit Weekend. And, I think this is definitely a topic that a lot of your members do need to get their heads wrapped around and better understand, that you don't go through this process on an island by yourself. You absolutely want to have the right people around you that are being supportive, not only in the exact transaction, but also making sure you're set up appropriately after the transaction. So when I think about a deal team, and when someone asks me that, it's very specific on timing as to where they are in that process. I think a lot of the messaging that you relay in ExitDNA is, if you're thinking about an exit, you're probably a little late to start really, putting that plan of action into play. So if you think you're going to sell in a year, you need to start thinking about this now. If you're thinking about selling in 3 years, great, you've got more time, but you should start thinking about who you need advising you, both personally and professionally. So I kind of separate the two. So, for the deal itself, and when I say that, I mean, you are an owner, you are engaged, and you are ready to sell. So the first, deal team member that comes to mind is obviously comes from my world, kind of the investment banker, the M&A advisor. Do you feel that you need someone sitting shoulder to shoulder, managing a process, helping you think through who are my buyers and having those conversations, helping you negotiate and finding that right buyer? As you've learned through the ExitDNA program, you don't always need an M&A advisor, and that's fine. But if you do think you need one, that's a key person to have. And that the timing around that is definitely when you're closer to wanting to get out and market and start advertising. So that's when you're really starting to, say, okay, it's time to push the button and let's get to market. So I'd say about a month or two before you're ready to go to market, you should absolutely start thinking through, well, who do I know? I need to get some referrals. As with anything, you should talk to a couple different groups and make sure it's the right fit. And I think we can go in a little bit deeper on that subject later on in this call. Right. The second deal team member specific to your transaction is your CPA, is your internal controller. It is making sure that if that person is internal to your organization or external, either way, it's fine, but they need to be one of the first people that knows your intentions for wanting to sell, because they are going to play an integral piece in this process. Because once buyers start looking at your financials and start asking questions, you as the owner, obviously, your numbers, but it's really good to have your full support and backing by your controller, your CFO, whoever that may be. And even more so once you get under LOI. LOI is a letter of intent. So that's the point of the transaction where you say, I agree to sell to you, buyer. But then there's still usually 60 to 90 days at least of going into more due diligence. And at that point, the buyer is going to bring in their own external audit partner or financial partner that's going to dig in even deeper. And so there's going to be a lot of questions that you and your CFO, your controller, are going to be on during that due diligence process, which again is why it's really important to make sure that you've got the right person. And quite honestly, if you just have a bookkeeper, and that's fine, I think that is something you should think about before you look to sell, is who is that person? There's a lot of, fractional CFOs or people that know the process of selling the business that can really be that person that can support your financials. But if they're not already in your business, they're going to need some time to get caught up on your business, both historically, forward looking, so that when you're having those conversations, they know how to push back and support the numbers. So that's another key member. And I think the third most important deal team member, again, when you're in the transaction or about to start the transaction, is an attorney. I cannot stress enough the importance of making sure this is not your buddy. This is not your friend from college that does commercial legal stuff. That you need an M&A transaction attorney. I honestly, this is kind of I don't negotiate that with my clients. You have to have an M&A transactional attorney. If you don't, and you choose to use your corporate lawyer, who maybe does M&A on the side, or someone else that I can almost guarantee you, and Matt can probably attest to this, you will leave money on the table. There will be things that are missed, that are protections that you as a seller absolutely need, not only just to get to the table to close the deal, but after the deal. You just have to have someone that is very keenly aware of all the things that you as a seller need to make sure are memorialized in all those legal documents. And so again, M&A transaction attorney, no questions asked. You've got to have someone like that on your side. So that's kind of the deal team itself from a process running. I'm going to sell my business. For those of you that have the chance to, you've got some time, you've got a year, you've got 2 years, 3 years, whatever that may be. I think there are two key people that you need to have to pull into your business right now. And that is a wealth manager and a tax strategist. And so oftentimes that can be the same person. There are a lot of shops that kind of offer those services as an umbrella service, and that's fine. But there are just so many things that are important that, again, if you don't do now before you sell, and you're in process and you try to spin up a trust, or you want to have some of the proceeds go to your kids, and you're 60 days from closing, it's just not going to happen. Yep. Or it may happen, but it's just not going to be at the point at which, if you had started before the process, you could really get your ducks in a row. So that is very important, is to make sure that when you have this large liquidity event, as Max says in the program, selling a business is likely one of the largest, economic transaction upsides you will have in your lifetime. And that's great, but you want to make sure that money is taken care of moving forward. And that's really taking the time to dig in on your personal wealth strategies, thinking through all that. And then also on the tax side, what are the ways that I can reduce the impact of the tax, when I get this influx of cash. And when a deal closes, you might get cash year one, and you might get some more in year two. You might get some in year three. You may have some earnout equity. So you really, again, kind of similar to my thoughts on the attorney, it's great if you've been working with a wealth manager that was your buddy from college or anybody like that. But if you are not working with a wealth manager that has dealt with post-transaction large liquidity events, setting up the proper structure, I would highly encourage you to seek out that person, not saying you have to fire your personal wealth manager, that's fine, but you really want someone that can come in strategically and help you think through what are the various entities, what are the various structures, how can we make sure you maximize, again, this is what it's all about, is maximizing your exit.
Yep.
And it's great to get a big check, but if too much of it is going to the government or too much is not going to benefit your kids or your ancestors, again, you're leaving a lot on the table. So I'll stop there, but at a high level, I kind of think of it in those two buckets in preparing for that transaction.
No, this is perfect because, one of the things that I intentionally did in setting up for this call is I didn't send you anything in advance because I wanted everyone to hear your perspectives and perhaps any areas that I might have a different opinion or a different perspective. And as I look down here, I sort of checked them off as you were saying them. I basically said there are 5 members of the deal team, and you kind of nailed all of them. You said them. The other thing I like a lot is that you separated kind of the personal and professional, both in terms of the timing, which I do want to talk more about, when you engage someone on your deal team, but also the implications are sometimes different. And I was smiling, and I know you've heard me tell this story before, but one of the things that you just mentioned is this idea of tax and wealth planning for someone personally pretty far in advance of a potential exit. And I was sharing over the exit weekend, it was probably one of the funniest and scariest moments of my young entrepreneurial life is I had sold my first company, and it was a life-changing transaction in a lot of ways. I got, a little bit of money at close, a lot of equity, because the company that bought us was rolling up businesses to take it public. And so the real opportunity for us financially was going to be when this company went public. So long story short, it wasn't even a year after I sold my business that the buyer filed to go public. They put everything in process to start the road shows and really build up this IPO, which for us, it was again, 8-figure, life-changing kind of opportunity. And they distributed a draft of the S1, which is kind of the pre-public document. And they had the, I guess, major shareholders, if you will, people that own some significant or semi-significant amount of the company were listed as shareholders on the S1. And so I was looking through the S1 at, myself and all of the other founders that sold their business into this roll-up. And I kept going down the list and using your name as an example. It would literally say, Robert Taylor, your name. But then the next 10 entries would be Robert Taylor Trust 1, Robert Taylor Trust 2, Willow Oak Trust 7. And I was like, what the hell are all these things? Why does Robert have 9 or 10 different entities? And a lot of them would say, Taylor Children Trust 1 and things like that. And I realized when it was way too late that the liquidity I was going to receive was going to all come to me, was going to be subject to all of the taxes, and all of these other, not every, but a lot of the other sellers that were in my exact same position had met with wealth managers, tax strategists, estate planners, and had taken their companies and put them in all of these various trusts and entities so that on that IPO, the money was flowing intelligently to all these different buckets. I didn't even know that world existed. So I learned kind of the hard way, too late, that you do want to have those conversations. I would say, yes, 6 months to a year at the latest before you, because a lot of the changes that you would make get kind of thrown out if they're too close to a transaction, because it becomes too obvious that you're trying to avoid taxes or you're trying to kind of, take advantage of something versus as part of your normal course of business. If you think you're going to sell in 2 years and you want to start doing some estate planning, you can do that. And it's just part of the fabric of your business going forward. So that was, I really, I learned that one the hard way. And now I feel very strongly about it when I advise others.
Yeah, no, that was a great point you made there at the end. Is it's not necessarily the timing on that is not necessarily just for your sake. Legally, if you do it too late, they'll call you out and it won't go through. So
Right.
there literally is a drops at time where, hey, okay, we know what you're doing. Sorry, you're too late. Not going to happen. So that's a good point on it. It's not just from a beneficial, hey, you just want to get it settled. It's literally, you might not be able to do any of these strategies if you wait too late.
And I think the other, so, there's kind of that wealth management, trust and estate kind of strategy. All of this also depends on the size of the proceeds, 7 figures, 8 figures, 9 figures, you're talking about very, very different implications, but they're all material and relevant to a seller. If you're going to sell your business for $1 million or $2 million, that is a big deal. And you want every single dollar of that going in your pocket or where you want it versus lost to taxes or lost to something else. The other thing that has come up as a result of ExitDNA is I have watched not only, my exits and the things I went through, but I've watched some of our members on this journey. And you and I both know we had a couple members had, really nice 8-figure exits last year. But talking to a few of our members and some of the things they were doing as they built up to their exit, I was exposed to even some new tax strategies that I thought were brilliant and very meaningful to the extent, someone as a founder of a closely held business could move some of their stock into a foundation, for example, that is going to fund charitable causes and do things that they care about, but it gives them a huge tax advantage. But the one I'm thinking of in particular, and we have an expert that can help members with that, it has to be 12 months, I think is the drop dead date. It has to be at least 12 months before a deal is closed or it gets thrown out. And so I think the timing of these things, like a lot of what we talk about within ExitDNA, is really, really critical.
Yeah.
So when you said something else that I would like to probably go in a little bit deeper on, and that is with these experts, let's take your kind of deal team that is related to a transaction, meaning you have decided to sell your business, you're going to try to sell it by the end of 2024, for example, and you're starting to take the right steps to get prepared. When you decide that you're going to hire that investment banker, that attorney, and that kind of financial partner, the CPA, internal or external financial partner, how do you, Robert, think about, or how would you recommend our members start thinking about vetting and finding the right partner? Like what kind of questions they need to be asking? How do you find the right partner for your deal?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge, but it's one where if you put some intentional time behind it, you will find the right partner. So we'll kind of break out those 3 buckets, and I think there's a lot of similarities as you think through them. But again, just what's closest to me is the M&A advisor side. Even with the attorney or the CFO, whoever that may be, ask others in your close network that maybe have recently exited business. Maybe you're in a larger trade association or group where that people in your industry have recently exited. Reach out to them and say, how was your experience? Who did you work with? Did you hire a banker? Why? Why did you, why or why not? Who was your attorney? Were they good? What would you say? It's always good to do the research, get educated on what others are doing. Don't recreate the wheel. Lean on what others' experiences are, and then apply that to your business. Who someone hires from an M&A advisor or an attorney may not always be the right person for you, but at least you kind of understand and learn from their vetting processes. So with an M&A advisor, and we'll do a little plug. I know there's a chat that you and I did, I think last year on the M&A process, and we went into this a little bit. So I would encourage anybody here to also check out that, because we kind of broke out a lot of this. But when you're thinking about hiring an M&A advisor, obviously there's a lot of different paths you can go. There's business brokers, there's your current bank that you work with that may have an investment bank arm, and then there's individual advisor firms, M&A advisor firms, boutique investment banks. And so I think all of those they all play a different role in based upon the size of your business, the industry your business is in, what their experience is, how they run a process. There's just a lot underneath the cover versus what you just see on their website, which is why I said earlier, make sure once you start thinking about it, give yourself time to interview these people and really think through who's the right fit, because you're going to be working with this person most likely for 9 to 12 months. Sometimes deals go faster, sometimes they go longer.
Yeah.
But you want to make sure that this person is in it for the long haul with you, and they don't get fatigued and that you get lost and they've moved on to other deals. Again, these are all things that I've seen happen. I know Mac has as well. So it's really focusing on who's the right fit. Personality wise, you want to make sure that you've got a good rapport with them, that they understand your business, that they have a really keen sense on who the right buyer is. They have they can provide you an outline of what they envision the process to be, how involved they want you, when they want you to come into this. Because that's a big thing, is you're hiring this advisor so that you can stay and keep working on your business, working in your business. Because the last thing you want to do when you go to sell your business is to stop working in your business. Because if there is any drop in production, that's when the buyers salivate and they come in and you're not going to get good offers. So you need an advisor that,
Well, I was going to say one of two things happens, and it's very common. I just want to hit that point with a highlighter, which is it is a long process, often longer and a little bit more intensive than people anticipate, meaning 9 to 12 months to kind of go from a process to a closed deal. And it's very common for that process to create distractions for a founder or an owner. It can drag on you, emotionally and mentally and all those things. And to your point, Robert, at a time when you absolutely don't want to see any softness in your numbers or performance, because either that will throw up yellow flags and further delay, or in some cases end the deal. People suddenly get concerned. Why are the numbers changing all of a sudden? I thought this was going to be a great year for your business. Or to the point you just made, the deal gets retraded because all of a sudden the LOI or something you were looking at was based on last 12 months or last quarter's performance. Now the numbers are dropping. They're going to retrade the deal and you're going to end up selling for less. And so it's a really key point. Apologies for the interruption, but I just want to make sure, I see it every day that a founder underestimates what it takes to get to the finish line. And if any of that leads to softness or decline in the business for any of those reasons, it's going to reduce that sort of maximum value that we're looking for. So
that's super helpful. And I would say, again, I encourage you to view the other talk that Mac and I had on the process itself, because there are other things about, the fee structure. What are they going to charge you? Are they making you pay a lot up front? Are they claiming, hey, you need a valuation report? A lot of things are ways for them to scrape economics outside of them earning the success fee, which to me can be yellow and sometimes red flags. So I just encourage anybody, that lean on this community, me especially, like if you're talking to others and you say, hey, I've got a couple proposals, like I'm happy to look at those and offer you feedback, because there's definitely some things you want to be conscious and aware of as far as the actual engagement with an M&A advisor. With an attorney, no different. Get referrals. Again, I can't stress enough, they need to be a transaction attorney. Get an understanding of how much they typically participate in the process. Some attorneys will be bulls and they will be around there helping the banker and you negotiate the right points. And some attorneys are, in my opinion, are a little more in the background. Well, they'll look at documents and redline it and give you their suggestions, but they're not going to necessarily hop on the call and really push some of those things. They're going to lean on you and your banker to do that. One's not right, one's not other. Every attorney works and operates in a different way, but again, it needs to be one that fits best with your individual situation. And then of course the CFO, I think that's the kind of the more challenging one is really understanding who can I bring into this business that can really help support the numbers because maybe our bookkeeper isn't the right person. So I would say if you're looking internally and whoever you have running your books has never gone through an M&A transaction, isn't familiar with this process, to me, that would be my kind of indicator that you should maybe start looking external to bring in someone. Again, I love the fractional advisor space. There's, fractional CMOs, fractional CFOs, fractional COOs. I think it's just a great space that I've seen grown over the last 5-10 years, that these people are oftentimes very experienced and can come into your business in a short-term manner, and you're not having to pay them as if they were full-time CFOs, but you're getting the value of having a CFO. So that's where I would say is similar to, like, vet someone that knows your industry. So there's not that learning curve of, if they've been over in retail and consumer, yet you're a manufacturing company, that's probably not the right hire. You want a CFO that knows manufacturing. So when they come in, they look at your P&L and all line items, they're like, boom, 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 boom. I get it. Okay. Yep. Great. There's not that big ramp up. So I think that would be a key determinant of who that right person is. And again, hopefully they've had transaction process before, because they understand what's to come and where they need to push and all those things that you're going to want to have on your side of the table as you get into negotiations.
So no, great points. And I think from my perspective, and Robert, you and I have talked about this, we've laughed about it, debated it. Many of our members have heard me talk about it. My early experience with investment bankers was actually pretty negative. And one of the reasons for that, one, I was young. I didn't have a lot of experience myself, but I effectively was outsourcing my exit to someone who on paper was pedigreed. They went to great schools. They were at a big investment bank. They were obviously smart, obviously experienced, all those things. And so I assumed therefore they can represent my company, my personal interest, all the things that matter to me in a deal. They're the right person because they're a lot smarter and more experienced than me to do it. And what I realized very quickly is I found myself in meetings during the diligence process, for example, where the investment banker would be answering questions and I'm in the room, but I'm kind of sitting back and listening to responses to questions about my business and our pro formas and our projections and competitors. And increasingly, I was getting uncomfortable with, why are they answering it that way? I would never have said that. Why are they positioning my team that way? Like, that doesn't feel like the way I would say it. And at that moment, I realized something that's stuck with me ever since, which is, no one knows your business better than you. An investment banker, an M&A attorney, an outsourced anything is an extension of your team, but you cannot fully outsource your exit. So when you think, from my perspective, when you think about a partner, it's basically someone that complements you in areas that you need either support or you need more depth or you need them to play a role, like be a really hard negotiator because you want to stay in the good cop, category, and you need a bad cop. But at the end of the day, it's almost like the soft part of it, in my opinion, is you have to be aligned across the things that really matter, morals, ethics, values, how you would, like to negotiate things, because that's what helps you determine, do I need a bull for an attorney or do I need a, analytical, superstar that's just going to be really detail oriented, but never negotiate. And that's a lot of the personal individual stuff that you're saying there, which is you have to, talk to these people. You have to ask them questions. How would they handle it if someone lowballed the deal or someone tried to retrade it in the middle of the process? Because you want to know, what is their style? And that was a big thing for me, was, what's the style? I have a very particular style. It's not right or wrong. It's just my style. And I wanted my team to reflect that. And so anyway, I agree. I think, you've been a great banker that a lot of our members have worked with, simply because, I think it is your understanding of, it is a partnership. It is not an outsource, Robert, go sell my company, I'll see you in 9 months. Like, it is a true partnership. So you have to be aligned. You have to be communicating a lot. It's kind of a grind together. So you want to be grinding with someone that you like, respect, and think is presenting your company and you and your team in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely been my approach, and where I feel the most success comes from is that partnership angle, is that, no one can sell your business better than you, but they can definitely be supportive,
Yeah.
and additive to that process to make sure you maximize your exit. And just having that collaborative approach, with every member of your deal team, all five of those buckets we talked about, is just going to be to your benefit, both short and long term. I think there's so much power in, a banker getting you pretty far down the rabbit hole with buyers, but there absolutely has to be that point at which you get brought back into the process, because you need to be telling that story. You know it better than anyone. And there's just something I've just seen where I'm having great conversations, and then when I introduce the founder into the conversation with the buyer, oh my gosh, like, it's just the exponential return on that intra call for the buyer to hear directly from the seller. It just sets a completely different tone than what I, as a banker and advisor, could ever achieve at that level.
And this probably goes into some of the things that you and I did talk about in this other session, but just to hit on it again, because I've heard you say it a lot, and it's a really key point. And that is that the structure of a relationship with an investment banker, for example, is typically really designed around a success fee. There are other components of it, depends on how much work needs to be done. But generally, the real economics are related to a successful transaction. But one of the things that can lead to, if you don't have good personal alignment, is it creates this incentive for a banker to go sell the company to the highest bidder, or someone who's, they know have closed other deals. And so they take this path of least resistance, which can be a great outcome financially, can be a great outcome for the banker. But what that isn't considering is this the right buyer for the seller? Is this someone that the seller can imagine working with the day after the deal closes? Is this the right buyer to take the legacy that you want, or the brand that you've built, to the next level? Or is this truly a financial transaction? And so I think that's another really important part of this kind of vetting process, is making sure that when you're talking to a banker in particular on the deal team, that they understand that the economics matter a lot. It's probably 90% for most sellers, but it's usually not 100. And, I personally have sold, 6 companies, but multiple times I've been in a position where I chose not the highest bidder financially, because I had better alignment with someone that mattered more. They were going to do something with the business that mattered to me, or mattered to the employees I was trying to take care of. So I think that's a really important part of this vetting process, is looking through the incentives to make sure that your banker or anyone on your deal team really understands what you're trying to get out of a deal.
Yeah, it all comes back to setting expectations. I can't stress enough that unless and until you set very clear expectations with all of your deal team members, you are increasing the chances of a successful outcome by doing so. Because if we'll just keep using kind of the M&A advisor banker, example. If you're interviewing a banker, they come in and say, "I've done several deals in your space. What's your EBITDA?" "Yeah, okay, we'll get you 8 times. We know the buyers. Let's go." That's great, but in my opinion, and Mac will as he's just said, there's a lot that's not being addressed there from an expectation setting standpoint. They're not asking the questions, well, what's your legacy? Do you want to roll equity? Do you want to find a strategic partner? Do you want to find a financial buyer? Do you want to find the best place for your employees, or you want your key management members to have a chance at excelling their career with whoever comes in and buys it? Do you want just one person to come in and kind of replace you as CEO. There's just so many more options and understandings and expectations that are under the economics of doing a deal, that you as an owner, it's to your benefit to, push and make sure that you are clear in setting those expectations with everybody you're hiring to help you, achieve those expectations, get that result that you want.
Yep.
And don't ever feel pressured to go a path that doesn't feel right. If your banker's steering you towards the highest bidder and you meet them and you're like, gosh, the numbers are great, but oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine this group owning my company and my family members, i.e. my employees, working for them. That's probably a clear sign that it's not the right deal, because similarly, I work with founders and owners up to that date, but I still keep the relationship afterwards. And I've heard many times afterwards, there is, seller regret. Gosh, I can't believe I sold to that group. I get texts every day from my employees that they're so unhappy and they wish that I would come back. And that's hard. I mean, those are real conversations I've had with exited owners. And it's just unfortunate. And it's too late at that point. And while nothing's guaranteed, again, the more that you put into this and make sure your expectations are clear, what you want to get out of it, just make sure everybody that you're working with is completely aligned. And that will just increase your chances at a successful outcome, both economically, but just knowing, your business is in good hands moving forward.
No, it's key advice. I want to be respectful of your time, and we have covered some of these things in the other session, which I think is a great point to recommend. Everyone that's interested needs to listen to that, because it talks specifically about the investment banker role. Mm-hmm. One thing I haven't asked you that I'm curious to hear your opinion is, in my view, I think you and I share this, I think it's the M&A kind of advisor, investment banker, decision, partnership, and then probably the second most critical is that M&A transaction attorney. Even if you don't have a banker, you have to have an M&A transactional attorney. I've done deals myself directly, but I had really good transaction attorney.
Agreed.
But I also know, and I work with a lot of people, transaction attorneys can be very expensive. Mm-hmm. They can be, if you called a great transactional attorney 9 months before you intend to sell your company and ask them to review things, you can basically be on the clock, and they can have legitimate things that they could advise you on and charge you for the next 9 months. Maybe that's needed, maybe it isn't. So my question is, in your opinion, generally speaking, when is the right time for someone to not necessarily vet and choose a banker, but to engage a banker so you're on the clock? Like, when does that happen in the process that a founder should be saying, I probably now need to have the attorney looking at this, advising me formally?
Yeah, no, it's great to, again, starting sooner the better, just to establish that relationship. But to your point, that doesn't mean they need to turn the clock on immediately. I think where it really, just making sure you have that relationship teed up, ready to go. They know you're in market. They're ready for when it makes most sense. To me, you don't need to pull your attorney in until you start receiving offers. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily, so typically there's an initial indication of interest, which is just a very high level general, hey, we're interested and we think your business could sell. It's usually like a range. It's not even a defined number. And we think that, we'll do cash, some debt, maybe roll some equity, but just know we're interested. Mm-hmm. You don't need an attorney to look at that letter because it's non-binding. Yep. But at least okay, the 20 buyers we were talking to, we have 6 of them that have given us an IOI. Great. We're going to focus on these 6 buyers now. But it's really that next step, which is the LOI. Again, I mentioned, the letter of intent. When you start getting that, I would absolutely have an attorney put eyes on that LOI, because while that LOI still is a non-binding document, meaning, you are not bound by signing that you have to close. That's the final closing paperwork. The LOI does become, once you sign an LOI, it does become that document that everything moving forward looks back to.
Right.
When you're, negotiating deal points, or, not deal points because you'll negotiate that in the LOI, but when you're negotiating different structures of your purchase agreement and all that, and oftentimes they'll say, well, that's not what we agreed to in the LOI. So that LOI, while it's technically non-binding, it does become a very formal document that sets the tone for the rest of your engagement to get to the closing table.
It's kind of the foundation that everything's built on.
It really is. So
Yeah.
do not, so I would absolutely have an attorney review the LOI before you sign it. Because oftentimes some attorneys will help negotiate points in the LOI, and some of them will just say, hey, you should probably push back on this. But either way, you want to have that legal opinion on the LOI before you execute it.
So that is a great recommendation as kind of a trigger event. So if you're even in a formal process, you've hired bankers, the bankers are out talking to prospective buyers. Those prospective buyers have put in, indications of interest, IOIs as people call them. Those are just basically telling you what the market thinks about your business. The minute you receive the first letter of intent, or at least that you intend to respond to one, that is the trigger event. And I agree with you 100% that you bring in an attorney, because it does become a foundation that everything else is built on. Now, one recommendation that I've made, and I've done this a lot personally, is there is value typically in having, I think this is true of an attorney, I think it's true of a external CPA, or anyone that you want to give you a true third-party perspective on, are you ready? Do you have your ducks in a row? Are your financials in a presentable format? Are your legal documents that you have today, employment agreements, operating agreements, are they all in a good spot? Those are things that are really valuable to check off before you ever enter process. And so the way I tend to handle that personally is I have a great transactional attorney that I use for most of my deals. And I know, even though he's a friend now, I know that I don't want to be on the clock too early. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I will reach out to him and say, I would like you to spend, and I will give him a box, up to 4 hours reviewing the following documents. And I will, share my operating agreement or anything I would like him to review. But I've given him a box to say, I don't need the world's most exhaustive view of this. I just want you to give me some feedback. Is it good? Is there anything that stands out, positive or negative? And by boxing those things in, it oftentimes has allowed me to bring a professional in that tends to charge a lot of money per hour, but really get their expertise very, very early. But the clock is, on and off in 4 hours. And so, yes, I'm paying, maybe it's thousands of dollars, but that thousands of dollars gives me enormous confidence that I'm in a good spot. I can now work with my banker, start the process, knowing that I will pull them in at the letter of intent phase to get serious. So that's another recommendation across a few of these different categories. If you have a provider that bills by the hour or has a high rate, which many of the best ones do, of course, you get what you pay for, is to kind of box them in a little bit, but bring them in earlier with a kind of a tight expectation, and then really use that trigger that you mentioned as a letter of intent to engage them formally.
Yeah, and don't be afraid, absolutely 100%. Don't be afraid to ask the attorney when you're vetting, if you're talking to different groups. Typically, what do you charge from start to finish? What's the average cost for your firm to do an M&A transaction? They'll say, well, typically, we get brought in at this point, and then it's another 90 days. So we usually are charging, ends up between 30 and 40,000.
Yep.
And the next attorney might say, yeah, typically we get brought in, it's the next 90 days. It's usually between 75 and 100,000. I mean, there could be a potentially wide gap. And that's why, again, do your diligence, ask the questions. They will answer them, just so you have an understanding. And to Mac's point, don't always go with the low cost provider, because you do get what you pay for. But just, you want to go into this understanding, what is that cost? And again, it'll come out of your proceeds most likely. But again, that's real money that has to go to buy those services. So you want to make sure you get the return on that investment.
And I would say That is such a critical point. Even very successful founders who might be selling their business for, 8 figures in cash or, 7 figures in cash. I mean, a lot of money. I've watched many times them have some degree of either shell shock or just outright say, I'm not going to pay $1,000 an hour, for example. That is a very normal reaction because we're all somewhat cost conscious. But I will tell you many, many times, if I look back over my career of building and selling companies, a good transaction attorney in every single deal I've ever had has found me hundreds of thousands of dollars or saved me, if not hundreds of thousands, millions that would have been at risk because I didn't catch something or I wasn't thinking about an implication. So it's not an area to skimp. You will get it back with many multiples. And your almost worst case scenario is you just are more comforted. Maybe they didn't find anything that's out of the ordinary. They just did a great job and you paid a fair market rate for a great job, but you will sleep so much better knowing that there is no risk. You didn't miss anything. And again, cheap attorneys, cheap CPAs, any of these that are not truly transactional experience and haven't done deals like yours and much bigger, hopefully in many cases, they tend to miss those things. And those are the things that really, really hurt us. The last thing I want to kind of comment on, and you can expand on this if you have any particular thoughts, but I thought it was interesting that you said something about a fractional CFO, for example. And it's a really, really good point that I think maybe even in hindsight, I was a little bit, insular. I was looking at my internal team. I would have a few of the folks on the deal team, but I might not have really taken advantage of the fact that there are true experts who can come in, and a CFO is a great example of one who could come in for a few months and probably elevate the financials and the ability of everyone on the team to be more articulate and understand the numbers and the implications that is absolutely unlikely to happen from your typical controller, bookkeeper. That's just not their skill set. A bookkeeper and a controller that are really, really good, I mean, they could be world-class. They tend to be very tactical and they're great at that. They don't miss things. They're very detail-oriented. A good CFO is tactical and they have the base in finance, but they're also really strategic. And if you don't have that strategic role, you're going to likely miss out on the opportunity to talk about your numbers in a more exciting and more powerful way. It kind of goes back to what I always call that irresistible exit story. A small part of the irresistible exit story is financial. Why does a buyer think your numbers are going to be a lot better next year and a lot better the year after that? And that's usually strategic and the ability to talk about numbers in a very smart and articulate way. So I thought that was an interesting point you made, that sometimes it's absolutely not only okay, might be recommended to bring in a fractional resource as you are starting to think about selling your company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have one quick real world example that will kind of accentuate that point. I worked with a client a couple of years ago. They had been working with a CPA for 20 years, did a great job, but that CPA was solely focused every year on avoiding taxes. So what does that mean? She wanted to have the minimum amount of EBITDA and net income at the end of every year so that the tax bill was reduced as much as possible. And that's fine. That's great. But when you go to sell your business, if you have very small EBITDA or net income, you're going to not get top value. So in that instance, it was, again, too late to unravel what had been done for the last 20 years. But if you have the time and you're working with a CPA and you're really having that, tax strategy, that's great. But I would say if you can, a year before, that's maybe when you first call a fractional CFO or someone that's more strategically thinking, is like, how can we start unwinding this so that when buyers are looking at our business, the trailing 12 is not looked at as tax avoidance, but maximizing profits? Because you will be sold, on a multiple. I mean, you can always, they may not say we're going to pay you X multiple, but in the end, like they bought me for this, my EBITDA was this, and you can run the math. So it's something that, just I've seen it happen. If you have the chance, if you've been going on that tax strategy, avoidance strategy, again, that's not a problem. But if you've got to make that switch, that Max says in ExitDNA, when you make that switch of, okay, I'm going to sell this business, that is one thing you definitely want to think of as well. Don't keep avoiding tax. Try to change that strategy and pay a little bit more tax. I promise you, when you sell, you'll more than make up for it with what they pay you, having that larger profitability shown.
It's a really, really important point that we see a lot. It's almost like what, for a closely held business, I'm super guilty of this, have been a lot of my life. Yeah, if I own a business, I'm the majority owner, or I'm really trying to make a fair amount of money, but absolutely avoid tax. And so the way I run expenses through, the way I handle things is all related to my personal desire to reduce legally the tax liability.
Absolutely.
When it comes time to sell the business, I have to be able to show a very, very different picture. And the best way to do that is to literally show it. So you've made a change that people can evaluate and see a few quarters of. Now that I've tried to take off that personal tax avoidance or reduce tax liability, here's exactly what happens. Part of the dialogue going back 20 years can, of course, be disclosure of I ran it for 20 years to avoid taxes. Let me show you what adjusted it looked like. And I had a really smart external third party CPA come in and run my numbers back. And I can show you I would have made 10 times the amount of money. I just wasn't willing to do that personally. You're going to get the benefit of that if you want it. And so the combination of being able to tell that story, but show someone, really requires a very smart person, because otherwise you can say it, it's just not as believable, and you're not going to get the full credit. If you say, oh, well, I was running, lean for tax reasons, everybody's gonna be like, well, of course you were. But if you can show them, reforecast, look at the last 3 quarters, then all of a sudden it's not debatable. It's very credible, and that's what you want, is a credible view. So if someone is willing to pay you for some of that, not all of it, but you're going to get some credit that otherwise you would never get.
Yeah.
Anything that we didn't cover that you think that, a founder, an entrepreneur, a business owner should really be thinking about as it relates to deal team? Anything that, we didn't cover? Because I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think at a very high level, I think we really touched on the main points that we wanted to here. Again, I just encourage you, like every situation is unique. What worked for Sally in her business may not work for you, and so just, take the time, be intentional, make sure you get the right people around the table with you, set the right expectations, and hold everybody accountable. But remember, this is your business. This is your life. This is your exit. So make sure that everybody's aligned and working alongside you, and you guys are all going at the same pace, trying to achieve the same goal. I've seen it happen. It can happen. Just you put the time and effort behind it, and you'll do great.
That's great advice. And I think one of the core tenets of ExitDNA, we talk about it pretty much every week, that is, little changes and actions we take today compound into value over time. So time is your friend in this case. The earlier you start, even if you are years away from exit, just good dialogue with a wealth manager, with a tax strategist, with a good attorney. Just here's what I'm thinking about, knowing that, what would you recommend? What would I do differently? The more of that stuff you can do, it gives you time to let any changes or any thought processes change. Those things compound into value. The longer time you have, the more it compounds. And so I'm a big believer in starting this process as early as you can.
Yeah, and just last comment is don't hesitate to reach out to Mac or I. We have vetted and trusted partners in all of those buckets, that if you don't have the network that can provide you with some referrals, that's part of the value of being a part of this community, is lean on us and others. get those referrals. So so you're not feeling like you're going at it alone and doing a Google search and trying to find people. Lean on this community.
Great advice. Well, Robert, thank you very much for your time. And I hope everyone has enjoyed this session. Be sure to take that exact advice, reach out to Robert, myself, our community, other members, take advantage of this resource. But thank you again, Robert, for all that you have shared with us today.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it as always. Thanks, Mac.
Thanks so much. You've been listening to ExitDNA's Leave Nothing on the Table podcast. Thanks for tuning in. For more information about ExitDNA and details on how you can join our growing community, visit exitdna.com.